Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Haunted History of Invisible Women, True Stories of America's Ghosts, by Liana Renee Heber and Andrea Janes, narrated by Linda Jones. Introductions. Women, Death, and Ghosts. Andrea Janes. I have a fun day job. I run a ghost tour company in New York City. After about 3 years in business, I began to notice something about my customers. It came to me one day as I was leading a Ghosts of the Titanic tour. As I stood in Astor Place on a warm spring afternoon explaining the gender breakdown of the first-class lifeboats aboard that ill-starred vessel, I informed my tour group that those lifeboats carried almost exclusively women and children. There were almost no men aboard the lifeboats, I said, staring at the group of about 12 or 15 guests standing in front of me, all of whom were women. Kind of like this group. Everyone laughed, but I realized what I had said was very true. Our customer base skews heavily female. That moment of revelation left me scratching my head, wondering where the male customers were. Oh, sure, every once in a blue moon a man would come along, usually dragged there by a date or spouse. But as a general rule, female-identifying people made up 90% of my customers, which was fine by me, and yet it made me wonder. Was I doing something to alienate half the human population? It wasn't until a reporter approached me for a story on why women are obsessed with seeing ghosts that I realized ghosts are gendered. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Women are profoundly entwined with ghosts and ghost stories. There are several notions in Western culture that connect the intrinsically female with death. Of course, the very notion of gender is culturally constructed, just as ghosts are culturally constructed. Edith Wharton once asked, "What in the world constitutes a ghost except the fact of its being known for one?" Ghosts and gender both require naming and performing, and are not at all uncomplicated innate or inherent things. Part of this constructed identity has to do with the cultural roles of women in the United States in the last 2 centuries. Historically, women have always lived cheek by jowl with death. Married women tend to outlive our spouses, becoming widows sooner, longer, and more frequently. We hover near the border of death for hours, sometimes days, during the delivery of children, and historically we have very often died in the process. As of this writing, the maternal mortality rate in the United States, where I live, is actually on the rise. In the 19th century, when infant mortality rates ensured 1 in 5 children did not live to see their 5th birthday, women suffered heartbreak and arranged for funeral preparations with great frequency. And whenever a family member of any age died, it was often women who were in charge of arranging the funerals for their loved ones, as funerals 150 years ago fell within the domestic, and hence female, sphere. When it came to the spirit realm, women received special status there as well. The American spiritualist movement of the 1800s was mainly led by women, and allowed women for the first time to assert themselves as vocal spiritual leaders. Its primary adherents were women, many seeking comfort after the death of their loved ones following the Civil War, or solace after the too frequent deaths of infants and children. Women were thought to be perfect mediums, conduits for spirit communication, because they were open, receptive, passive, and less rationally minded than men. Women figure prominently in ghostly folklore around the world, often as tragic or terrifying figures damned to become specters because of their very femininity. La Seona in Venezuela, La Llorona in Mexico, Kuchisake Onna, the slit-mouthed woman in Japan, Mae Na in Thailand, and any number of women in white or women in brown in various European traditions, demonstrate that the unleashed feminine, That awesome maelstrom of incredible sexual and physical power, multiple orgasm, gestation, birth, breastfeeding, so often feared, is dangerous and often leads to a terrible afterlife. In the arena of supernatural fiction, women appear with great regularity both as gothic, ghostly tropes and as authors. In fact, women authors accounted for a large percentage of the short stories published during the golden age of ghost stories, from 1840 to 1920. Women triumphed in the critically marginalized world of genre fiction, and excelled in the format of the short story, the ideal format for someone squeezing out a living between her other labors. In fact, this era gave women the means to profit from their own labor and to earn a decent living from the sale of their short stories, which leads us to the most interesting line of thought when it comes to women and ghosts, that in their intersection lies a kind of power. Though women are traditionally marginalized, and though many female ghosts are the spirits of women who died in awful, often misogynistic circumstances, that is, murdered by a spouse, not every female ghost is a tragic victim. Many exact vengeance, assert power, and subvert gender roles in ways unavailable to living women. As cultural critic Andy Zeisler writes, female ghosts have every bit of anger that makes living women sources of fear, but none of the societal restriction. In this way, ghost stories are often proto-feminist tales of women who, if only in death, subvert the assumptions and traditions of women as dutiful wives and mothers, worshipful girlfriends, or obedient children, by unleashing a lifetime's worth of rage and retribution. Spectrality can potentially bestow agency on a woman who was denied it in life, forcing her haunted victims to reckon with her whether they want to or not. While it's easy to dismiss and belittle a living woman who dares to be vocally critical or angry, it is much harder to silence a ghost. She has remarkable staying power. Engaging with the spirit realm could even, quite literally, grant living women a voice. Spiritualists were able to advocate for social change from abolition to women's rights in public arenas, speaking on stages in ways that would have been unthinkable before 1848, the year the Fox sisters first heard the spirit rappings that led to spiritualism, and, incidentally, the year of the Seneca Falls Convention on the Rights of Women. 1848 was also the year Catherine Crowe published her ghost hunting manual, The Night Side of Nature, in England, inextricably establishing women in the world of paranormal research and investigation. It was a big year for women and ghosts. It's the complicated intersection between the tragic or conservative side of ghost stories that represent women as victims and the unleashed, unsilenced, undaunted aspect of female ghosts we find compelling. Neither victims nor heroes, our female ghosts have, as Avery Gordon calls it, the right to complex personhood, possessing sometimes contradictory humanity and subjectivity that is never adequately glimpsed by viewing them as victims or, on the other hand, as superhuman agents. They're also just really damn interesting tales. In this book, we have collected some of our favorite female-centered ghost stories from around the country, what we consider to be the most thought-provoking and significant ghost stories. In a cheeky nod to the way gender is a societally constructed norm, we've decided to organize them by trope. Surely you will recognize the categories of spinster, witch, and fallen woman, just some of the types we have compiled here. We want to examine how and why these stories are told in local legends, on ghost tours, and by generations of Americans, as much as the stories themselves, many of which do live up to the cliché, stranger than fiction. This book is an exploration of what ghosts and hauntings tell us about ourselves, and about the historical role of women in this country. By understanding our ghosts, we may better understand ourselves, both past and present, and how female-identifying individuals are represented in the margins of historical record. History and ghost stories function for us as a kind of mediumship. We humbly ask questions of the dead to see the deeper meaning in their stories. We seek out the facts of their stories to the absolute best of our ability, as much as historical research allows. We come to inquire, to reveal, to listen, and to share these women's often forgotten, sometimes misrepresented stories. We are glad you are here on this journey with us. And to you, we say the same thing we say to the ghosts who allow us to share these stories. Thank you. Existential Questions. Liana Renee Heber. I have always been haunted. Not in a scary movie way, but in a wistful, melancholiac kind of way. The way that made Poe's stories and poetry resonate with me at a too early age. With that odd understanding of sadness and an inexplicable draw to the 19th century came an equal and enthusiastic desire to discover, to query, to contemplate the big mystical questions that keep folks up at night, to play hide-and-seek across the veil. But I've done so trying not to take myself too seriously. A life in theater, playwriting, and fiction must be taken with a sense of humor. Still, I'm passionate about my work and consider it a calling. Spirits have always been with me, asking me to tell their stories. That request has come in many forms: a sharp instinct, an odd synchronicity, something I know but don't know how I know it, a sudden inspiration, or a whisper on the wind. So I do what has been asked. I tell spectral stories as a novelist, as a tour guide, a lecturer explaining the importance of ghost stories, and now sharing these tales, widening history and experience. This book isn't here to tell you what to believe, to convince you ghosts are real or they're not. But disbelief will not make the lived experiences described here untrue. I think one's relationship to the spirit world, like religion and identity, is fundamentally personal and contains multitudes. Personally, I don't believe hauntings are, by their nature, inherently or always scary. I think they can be beautiful, sometimes funny, often endearing. A paranormal experience can say as much about the living as any entity in question. The thing that surprised me most about becoming a ghost tour guide was that I became a sort of paranormal chaplain, guiding my audiences through their own questions about the beyond. In some cases, my reassuring them that they weren't out of their mind for sharing with me something inexplicable provided comfort. I'll never forget a bright young man from the South who, between stops on the tour, just needed me to tell him it was okay that he sometimes saw his beloved departed grandmother in their living room. I asked him if he was glad to see her, and he was. So I said there was nothing to worry about, but to take heart that she was still looking out for him. He seemed relieved. What I did caution him about was that there would be some places it wouldn't be safe or welcome for him to share that knowledge, and I trusted him to figure out where he could and couldn't be honest about his experiences. I was thanked heartily by his kind father, who seemed to need to hear all of that, too. Ghost stories have an intimacy to them. I believe the thrall of ghosts, compared to other paranormal creatures, is that they are of us, and we all may someday become them. Our loved ones may at any point become a startling story. We, too, may become legend. Ghosts can't be discounted as easily as any other paranormal entity. It is the unknown, mysterious echo of something human that makes ghost stories eerie, the familiar instantly strange. Telling a ghost story in combination with a precise historical location infuses a dynamic mysticism into what is otherwise taken as historical fact. It gives us, as tour guides, other angles and perspectives by which to consider the past and present, merging timelines to make figures of history contemporaneous in haunting. In this book, we focus on a personally curated selection of stories. By no means is this an exhaustive list, nor is it an encyclopedia or compendium. We hope to examine and unpack some of the inherent tropes of ghost stories, Gothic fiction, haunted houses, at various crossroads of women's history. We hope to expand this concept in future volumes to be able to include many more stories. In my Spectral City series of novels, my spiritualist and psychic medium heroine, Eve Whitby, confronts her pressing and often debilitating sensitivities by devoting her career to them, by giving the ghost's voice and worth, the idea that a soul still has something to say. I gave this drive to Eve because I have it myself. This book is another way in which I can honor my lifelong quest to examine whispers across the veil, and why the living are so keen to listen. During the course of my career, I had the pleasure of meeting paranormal superstar Katrina Weidman, host of television's Paranormal State, Paranormal Lockdown, Portals to Hell, and more. I thought of her immediately when this book became a reality, and wanted to ask about her experiences dealing with ghosts on such a large scale and for such a wide audience. She was gracious enough to answer. One of the aspects that is hardly talked about in paranormal media is the emotional toll this work can take on you. There seems to be a connection between tragic history causing places to have a high amount of activity. When I'm working, on camera or privately, I'm bombarded with traumatic stories from the past. Suicide, murder, neglect, and abuse are part of the daily conversations we have in the field. I'm often asked how I go into, and in some cases, live in these terrifying locations. The truth is, yes, unexplainable activity can be scary, but I find that the history leaves more of a stain on my heart than any supernatural occurrence I could encounter. Does the emotional ride change if the supposed spirit is believed to be female? What I will say is I often find myself being, again, more affected by the history we encounter involving women. For instance, one case I worked involved the murder of a young woman by her boyfriend. Other cases involved women who were unjustly placed in mental health facilities simply because the men in their lives could do it. Then there are the present-day cases where some of the women I've assisted are being called bad mothers for exploring the paranormal realm, even though they've exhausted all other options when it comes to finding natural explanations for the phenomena in their homes. All of that, for me, is hard not to take on. I feel that emotion on a deeper level because even though I may not have experienced their exact situation, I can empathize due to the hurdles I have been through by simply being a woman. When I asked if being a woman in the industry of ghost hunting affected or informed her experiences, she had this to say. It's no secret that when it comes to the media side of the paranormal field, it's mostly been men who get to take center stage. I always find that interesting, considering the field and the audience who indulges in the media itself skews and identifies as female. So why do we have so many men running the show? I can only speak to what I've seen and experienced personally. I've noticed a lot of old rhetoric that refuses to die. Males lead and females follow. Males are protectors and females need protecting. With the added element of television, we're also harshly critiqued in comparison to our male colleagues when it comes to our looks and body types. Now, is paranormal media unique for this? Certainly not. There's a lot of industries where you can see the same challenges. But it has bled into ours, and it wouldn't be a full picture of the work if I said that hasn't affected me. One of the more rewarding aspects is when I do a lecture or event and a parent comes up to me with their young daughter and tells me how our work has inspired their child to be brave, speak up, and want to be a leader. I want to make clear, there's nothing wrong with being scared or not wanting to take on a leadership role. But I think it's really important to show both sides. For far too long, our field has shown only the one that feeds into a very old narrative. What I love about the paranormal field, that I hope we see more of when it comes to media, is that regardless of gender, religion, race, sexual orientation, age, nationality, status, etc., it brings so many people together based off of a shared interest, or in many cases, being affected by the unexplained and spending your time searching for answers. That's powerful, and I hope we see more of that varied representation moving forward. She's right. Interest in the paranormal can be a unifying draw and can still honor individuality and deeply personal moments. I have over 20 years of experience working in and guiding people through many haunted places around this beautiful country. The only things each site has in common is a hook of historical interest and people who come with unanswered questions in their hearts. I, too, love the question. As one of my favorite poets, Rainer Maria Rilke, said in his letters to a young poet, "I beg you to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for the answers which could not be given to you now because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer." I think that lingering question may extend after death, too. Happy haunting. Part 1. Death and the Maiden. Introduction. Liana and Andrea. Edgar Allan Poe famously said, "The death of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world." In Poe's defense, quite the melancholiac, this may have more to do with conceptualizing and memorializing the loss of women he loved than something a woman should aspire to. By poetry he means the topic is one to be explored with careful words, that death is an antithetical state to the young and beautiful. Still, the emphasis on beautiful women implies the bias toward youth and beauty that has been around since the dawn of time, as if, were she not young and beautiful, it would not be worth notice. Some took that poetry quite seriously, and a sort of tuberculosis chic look became popular in the 19th century, romanticizing wasting away. Modern fashion still covets too thin models, and whole industries revolve around the sale, marketing, and idealization of women's body image, a consistent topic of media obsession. The very idea of what's prized as beautiful changes through time, and women must keep up. In the rush to do so, society's structured gender binary again resets the distinct parameters of what's acceptable and what is ideal. For femme-presenting folks and trans women, there is an additional layer of scrutiny, gatekeeping, and marginalization levied upon them. The societal hoops to jump through remain in flux and entirely conditional. The creation of an ideal is used as a voracious sales pitch to those who wish to be seen as beautiful, the standard of beauty being determined by societal law and in the context of a given era. But that beauty is, of course, fleeting. Part of the chase also races against the clock. The spirits who are stopped in time retain their youth, mystery, and beauty. They might also still hold their pain, eternally, a cycle of revisiting their final moments or haunting the place where they died or had their most emotional impacts. The following stories bring Poe's quote to spectral life, as we see how idealization set in as an inherent part of their ghost stories, and they became the perfect poetical subject, an eternally beautiful young wraith who can neither grow old nor break out of the idealization they have been placed into. Considering the expectations placed on women through the years, to put it too bluntly, these women died before they could become a disappointment. Their life being cut short places them in a realm of endless possibility and eternal romanticization. For the Don Cesar, the idealization of an opera singer led to the construction of an elaborate hotel in honor of a star-crossed love, while Kate Morgan, who died by suicide at the Hotel del Coronado in 1892, was dubbed by the press the beautiful stranger, and a race to identify her captured the nation in the throes of the Gilded Age. There are several references in this book to Angel in the House, a sprawling, overwritten poem published in 2 parts by Coventry Patmore in 1854 and 1856. It was held as the standard-bearer for women's existence in the middle of the 19th century. The poem creates a rarefied limited sphere for a woman, where she is simultaneously belittled and placed on a pedestal. The maidens of this chapter would have been expected in their time periods to adhere to the conflicting expectations laid out in this poem, one that had an extraordinary cultural influence that would outlast its century. As influential of a poem as Angel in the House was to 19th century attitudes regarding women, so too was Of Queen's Gardens, a conservative essay originally given as a lecture and published in Sesame and Lilies in 1865. This essay, the mere thought of which still makes Leanna furious over 20 years after her first collegiate examination of the text, essentially posits that a woman should be kept behind walled gardens, tending the beautiful flowers she herself represents. In doing so, she may remain a pure, innocent, and civilizing force to tame the beast of man, who goes out into the wild world as the doer. The author, John Ruskin, famously had his marriage annulled by his wife, Effie Gray, for lack of consummation. Essentially, it seems Ruskin was revolted by the reality that his wife had pubic hair and was a full-grown woman. His sense of an idealized woman was at a profound disconnect with reality, to put it mildly. The annulment was a huge scandal at the time, but Ruskin's ideas about women, their place and their purpose, his evident desire to keep them forever children, still scurry into modern thought. There has always been an expectation of women that they perform their societal roles, a purview which is wide-ranging and must be done without complaint. It is no coincidence that several of the women in this book are performers, actresses, singers, or women reinventing themselves, where their identities on and off stage were a subject of interest, intrigue, and expectation, well after their deaths. Those who have bucked the narrow window of femininity through history have often been punished or additionally marginalized. How we think of such women as ghosts often carries on those burdens. However, if a maiden has not progressed to her next level of purpose, as defined by the limited maternal and matrimonial social mores our modern society still grapples with, she is additionally trapped in an unfulfilled state. That tension then adds to societal perceptions of her ghost story and any myth-making surrounding it. Beginning this book with the tragedy of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911 throws the doors of trauma wide open. The shock of so many lives cut short by greed, negligence, and egregious lack of consideration lingers on beyond historical fact, haunting us with the terrible reality of people who were thought to be disposable. The women of dark academia straddle a nebulous void, spirits moving toward progress and expansions of mind and intellect, and yet perhaps moving farther from that idealized house and its resident angel. The college years represent a time when women are straying further from their domestic role and closer to the traditionally masculine territory of the intellect and the professions. Perhaps it is for this reason that the trope of the murdered co-ed remains so popular. It is bloody revenge upon the maiden for daring to seek fulfillment in these arenas. Precisely at the moment the young woman dares to break away, she is violently struck down. Threats of sexual and physical violence haunt the college campus and are reflected.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?